It is always embarrassing looking back at movies like the 1998 Godzilla movie, the Super Mario Bros. Movie, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie, or the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes movie, and seeing them optimistically say, yeah, we're going to do a sequel, and then fall flat on their face. Granted, that doesn't always indicate bad quality. Look at the John Carter movie. That's one of my favorite films, and it was trying to do a series of movies based on the books by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and it failed in that regard. But most of the time, that kind of thing indicates a bad movie. Hey, did someone say Eragon? I should point out I have not read the book Eragon or any of its sequels, so I had no preconceived hopes of this movie being good, and yet I was still incredibly disappointed with this movie. So after more viewings of this thing than I care to admit, I think I have some ideas on how this movie could have been improved. But a quick reminder of the rules when I do these videos in case you haven't seen my video on Battlefield Earth. As you may have guessed, I'm here to offer suggestions on how the movie could have been improved. If you like the books, that's fine, I bear you no ill will, but I don't care about the books. I'm only here to look at this movie and say, this is what was bad and this is how it could have been better, even if that makes the movie even more different from the books than what it already was, which from what I understand was already quite a bit. So if you're a fierce defender of the book was better, then please go no further because everything I say will probably make you mad. Or maybe not, I don't know. With all of that being said, here are some ways I think the 2006 fantasy movie Eragon could have been improved. My chief complaint about this movie ever since I first saw it was that it was just Star Wars with dragons. I like Star Wars and I like dragons, but if I want to watch Star Wars, I'll just watch A New Hope. I've had multiple people tell me this is not Star Wars with dragons thrown in, and I cannot fathom how these people don't see that yes, this is Star Wars with dragons thrown in. Stop me if you've heard this one before. A bad ampersand sigma sigma old warrior finds a farm boy who is destined to overthrow the evil bad guy, who is also a bad ampersand sigma sigma warrior who was once allies with the old guy working with the farm boy. And at one point, they go to rescue a princess who sets the plot of the movie in motion by sending a blue thing in the direction of the farm boy. And in the process of rescuing the princess, the old man tragically dies. Aww, and they're joined by a roguish outlaw who resists helping but ultimately does save some lives in the end. And we end with the bad guy still at large, saving him for the sequel, which we mercifully did not get in the case of Eragon. I'm just going to assume if we had gotten sequels to Eragon, we would have found out that Princess Arya is Eragon's sister, and they are both children of Galbatorix, and Brom brought Eragon to live with his uncle when he was a baby. Now, I don't always hate it when stories borrow plot elements from somewhere else. Since we're already comparing Eragon to Star Wars is not an entirely original story. There's a little bit of the Searchers, Flash Gordon, the Hidden Fortress in that movie, but they combine these influences in such a way that it feels original and familiar. Eragon just feels familiar. So my first suggestion to improve this movie is to make it feel less like Star Wars. There's any number of ways you could do this. Maybe don't kill Brom, that's Obi-Wan Kenobi in this movie. Separate him from Eragon so that he can have his big hero moment, but give Brom his own side quest that he has to do at the end of the movie. This would be right before Eragon meets the rest of the rebellion, so you wouldn't have a whole lot of time to devote to this separate quest. So just let it be a little 3-minute sting before the movie is over. You still effectively get the same climax with Luke becoming the hero who saves the day, but it differentiates the story from Star Wars just a little bit. Considering I don't want to kill off Brom, I would say the movie doesn't need to take a detour to save the princess. There's plenty of chances for the bad guys to fight our heroes, so you don't really lose anything there if you remove that scene. And if you love Princess Arya, which I can't see that you would if you've only seen this movie since she's little more than stoic princess woman, but if you still want her to be in the movie, once she sends the egg away, she doesn't get captured, and then she just makes her way straight to the rebellion where she meets Eragon later on. Or what if we did something with Eragon's cousin, who literally does nothing in this movie? All he does is run away so the army doesn't recruit him. But what if he doesn't do that? What if instead he goes and joins the army? Hey, that would be interesting, a conflict of ideologies. Why does cousin want to join? Why does Eragon want to stay? What if Eragon sees his own flesh and blood in the army that he's fighting at the end? Is he still committed to fighting with all that he has if it means that he might have to kill his cousin? We also see at the beginning some boys are being drafted against their will. So Eragon and the rebellion fighting against people who don't really want to do this, that is some moral complexity that this movie should have explored. Or how about this? Galbatorix is barely in this movie. It feels like they had John Malkovich for half a day of shooting. I guess technically, if we're pairing characters in Eragon with their Star Wars counterparts, then Galbatorix is kind of sort of the Emperor, and his henchman, the evil wizard, is more like Darth Vader, since he is defeated in this movie, and Galbatorix is hinted to be the villain of the overall series. But in terms of backstory, Galbatorix is totally Vader. But if you just watch A New Hope by itself, Vader is not an interesting character. And I say that with love, please don't kill me. It takes multiple movies to peel back the layers and get to know the character. So maybe this movie should have made more of an effort to make Galbatorix more interesting. Brom Kenobi paints a pretty black and white picture of good versus evil with no middle ground. But what if Galbatorix did all of those things Brom tells Eragon about, but he's not a 100% bad guy? We're told there's this other evil dragon rider, Morzan, who killed Brom's dragon and was friends with Galbatorix. What if, instead, Morzan Morzan was evil, and Galbatorix was a little more on the fence of good and evil. Instead of Emperor Palpatine, think Magneto. And maybe Galbatorix didn't want Brahm's dragon to die. I don't know the specifics of dragon reproduction, but let's assume they do it the old-fashioned way, and maybe Galbatorix's dragon was a male dragon, and so was Morzan's, and Brahm's dragon was a lady dragon. And then when Morzan killed Brahm's dragon, Galbatorix realized the likelihood of resurrecting the dragon riders was pretty much gone. Maybe Galbatorix helped Brahm hunt down Morzan, and only after that, Brahm, disgusted with himself for giving in to revenge, and disgusted with Galbatorix for his own part in the fall of the dragon riders, goes into hiding. Maybe the government that was in power before Galbatorix took over was up to no good, and he wanted to stop them, but his fellow dragon riders either A, didn't believe him, or B, they needed proof, or C, most of the dragon riders were on the other side of the planet on some other mission, and he couldn't afford to waste time. So he was able to convince just a few of his fellow riders to help him overthrow whatever government was in control to stop what he perceived to be some pretty messed up stuff. And maybe along the way, he had to make more compromises, like teaming up with this evil wizard with Fruit Punch Mouth. Maybe he didn't like this guy, he knows he's evil and eats the souls of pregnant mothers or something, but he needs that guy's dark power to help him hold the throne, and he sees that as necessary because at this point, if he is dethroned, then it's complete chaos all across the land, even worse than it was before he took over. Now, I know what you're saying, that sounds an awful lot like Star Wars, pal. The prequels kinda touched on some of this stuff a little bit, with Anakin claiming that he had reasons for betraying the Jedi Order beyond saving his wife. But, and I don't want this to become more of me bashing on the prequels, I never really bought that. And in the original trilogy, it wasn't until the final moments of Return of the Jedi that I really bought Vader's redemption, against my better judgment. It wasn't until I read the Kieran Gillen, Salvador LaRocca Darth Vader comics that I understood that Vader actually wanted his son to help him overthrow the Emperor in The Empire Strikes Back. Growing up, I always thought that that was just a ploy put together by him and the Emperor, but at least for me, the complexity that I'm thinking of here was never really there in the Star Wars movies. Maybe it was much more nuanced in the expanded universe stuff, I don't know, I barely dipped my toe in that stuff. So if you had good actors like Jeremy Irons and John Malkovich acting this stuff out, it would be awesome. Yeah, most of the time Malkovich plays jerk faces, but I think I could see him playing a complex guy who does bad things for reasons that he perceives as good. Now, you might be thinking that doing this and keeping Jeremy Irons alive to do more stuff in the movie would increase the movie's runtime to like 8 hours. But I think if you give Galbatorix the screen time the evil wizard got, and give the evil wizard the amount of screen time Galbatorix had, you would have a lot more opportunities to explore Galbatorix's motivations in the past and in the present day. Or maybe Galbatorix taking over the kingdom was only part of a larger ploy that Jeremy Irons wasn't aware of. Have you read the 2010 Uncanny X-Force series? If you haven't, it's really good. You should read it. In that series, Archangel wants to hyper-evolve the planet, which will kill everyone on the planet, but he is doing that because the Celestials will destroy the Earth if it does not measure up to their standards. So he's doing really, really bad things for a good reason. So what if Galbatorix has some prophetic dream that something really bad is going to happen? Either A, the dragons and their riders get out of control and will kill billions, so he and his small group of fellow riders went to war with the rest of their order and even threw in with the government to help them pare down the number of dragons, because if they didn't, the dragons would have become a threat to the rest of the planet. Or B, the annihilation of the dragons was not part of his plan, it just happened when he took over the kingdom, but then he had a prophetic dream that something really bad is going to happen and uh-oh, we don't have any more dragon riders. Or C, maybe this evil wizard guy put those dreams in Galbatorix's head, and this wizard guy was getting rid of an army of superheroes who could stop him from tightening his grip on the kingdom. Maybe Galbatorix was kind of doing the thing that Jude Law did in the King Arthur movie Legend of the Sword. He has this egg, he knows it will imprint on someone, so he calls in every soldier from every corner of the globe to touch the egg and see if they can feel it kick or something. This might be a good place to bring in Eragon's cousin, and maybe he could do something that impresses Galbatorix, and he promotes the cousin to his own personal guard or something like that. In trying to find someone to bond with the dragon egg, if Galbatorix can find someone that he thinks he can count on, they could build a new army of dragons to protect the kingdom from whatever threat he thinks is coming, thanks to his dream that may or may not be real. Then Princess Leia stole the egg, it ended up in the hands of Eragon, and now Eragon wants to go to war with Galbatorix. No, we're wasting time, we've got this other threat bigger than me that you have to help me deal with. No, I don't trust you, Brahm told me about all the stuff you did. This could be really fascinating, and if you're thinking this would be too much for one movie, yeah, I'm starting to think you might be right. But that's okay, I'm way too in love with any of this stuff to discard it to keep it down to a manageable runtime. Now, to each their own, but I think this would have made for a fascinating movie. You can still have magic and battles and dragons, but you also have interesting characters doing interesting things. Of course, I'm a little biased, but the Star Wars connections aren't the only thing that soured this movie for me. There's also so many pacing problems that I imagine are difficult to avoid when you're adapting a 500-page book into a movie that's less than 2 hours long, which, since we're talking about that, I would want the movie to be just a little longer. I think even just an extra 15 minutes could have helped tremendously. There are so many parts of this movie, mostly in the first half, where I wanted wanted things to slow down so that I could actually care about these characters and what's going on, but the movie can't afford to do that. Even if it did add an extra 15 minutes for some of this stuff to be better developed, you have to get on with the story. Like, are we supposed to care when Eragon yells at Saphira to go away when his uncle dies? For that matter, are we supposed to care when his uncle dies? We've seen the uncle for, I think, one scene at this point. Even Owen Lars had more presence before he was snuffed out in A New Hope. I get that the movie is already a half hour in out of not quite a 2-hour runtime, so it wants to get the story going, but we need to establish these characters so that we can care when they go away. I feel nothing when Eragon yells at Saphira to get out of here because we have spent no time with her at this point. Unfortunately, I don't know if adding another 15 minutes would have completely fixed this, but it would have at least made it a little less of a problem, I think. But even with the limitations of a 2-hour movie, I think there's some things that we could have done to improve the pacing a little bit here. For example, let's reveal that Braum was a dragon rider much earlier. Unless the audience has actually turned their brains off, we already know that Braum is a dragon rider thanks to the opening narration, which is entirely unnecessary since he gives that same information later on in a movie, both at the pub when the soldiers threaten him and to Eragon one-on-one later on. But even though the audience is pretty sure Braum is a dragon rider because we've seen Star Wars, Eragon himself does not confront Braum about this until just over halfway into the movie. That would be like if Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke went to rescue Princess Leia, but Obi-Wan didn't tell Luke that he was a Jedi until they were already on the Millennium Falcon after they found out that Alderaan had been destroyed. There's no reason for this plot point to be delayed this much. There's several moments we could have gotten to this a little quicker in the movie. In the pub, when Eragon asks the soldiers to allow Braum to continue speaking treason against the king. Guys, I laughed so hard at that. Or maybe when Eragon sneaks into Braum's house to look at the book. Surely Eragon is smart enough to figure out that a guy who knows so much about dragons and has a nice book about the dragons is a former dragon rider. For that matter, you could have Eragon find out even earlier than that. When Saphira, that's Eragon's dragon, first hatches, every important character in the movie knows about it. Galbatorix, the evil wizard, the damsel in distress, Braum. So since dragons and their riders share a telepathic bond, maybe have Eragon tell Saphira that he felt someone else who was really close, who he instinctively knows was a dragon rider. Then he can put 2 and 2 together later on. You also have Murtagh, who is introduced way too late in the movie. Well over halfway in fact. He briefly saves Eragon's life as Braum is dying, but doesn't officially join the group until right before they reach the rebellion. In a 500-page book, you can introduce a new character halfway in because 250 pages is still a lot of time to develop this new character. You can learn a lot about him from Eragon's inner thoughts, which is something you cannot do in a movie. All we know about Murtagh is that his dad was an abusive father and an evil dragon rider, the one who killed Braum's dragon and Braum killed in retaliation, in fact. Man, wouldn't it have been cool to see Murtagh and Braum interacting with each other? The rebellion imprisons Murtagh because his father was evil, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I could very easily buy Braum being very suspicious of Murtagh because he might remind Braum of Morzan. The back and forth between these two would be very interesting to see, and since I want to keep Braum alive to go and do some quest thing near the end of the movie, maybe Murtagh can go with Braum. Murtagh is already familiar with this area, and since Braum won't have a dragon to get him where he needs to go, having a guide is a very good idea. This still wouldn't give him a whole lot to do, but seeing his complex thoughts on the guy who killed his dad, abusive as he was, that might be more interesting than the nothing that he brings to the movie that we got. And this is one of those things, if you pull everything off correctly, you would get a lot more of him in the next movie. There's some other pacing issues, like Saphira being born and then having to become a full-grown dragon in under 2 hours. In this case, I really don't envy director Stephen Fangmeyer. Wait, Fangmeyer? Fang, like dragon's teeth? Do you think that's why he got the job? He hadn't directed anything before this. That's the only explanation that makes any sense to me. Anyway, I know a lot of fans of the books probably hated Saphira going from the size of my cat to the size of a school bus in 3 seconds because magic, I guess, but this one is tricky. Unless you're doing a 13-episode Netflix series based on the first book, it's going to be really hard to have a full-grown dragon by the end of the movie, unless you have several months, maybe even a year, in between Saphira hatching and Eragon's uncle getting killed. But that wouldn't work because 1, how does Eragon hide a dragon like this from his uncle and from the rest of the village? Where does he get enough food to keep a growing dragon healthy and well fed? And 2, if Eragon has the dragon for a year before the plot gets moving, that makes the evil soldiers look even more incompetent than they already are in the movie. You want to feel like your heroes are in a little bit of danger, I think. So I'm sure this wouldn't make fans of the book happy, but my solution to this is that Saphira does not become a full-grown dragon by the end of the movie. You can say Eragon had her hiding in the barn or in the forest near his uncle's property for a few weeks before the soldiers found his uncle, and then he meets up with Braum and they start heading to meet the rebellion. They wouldn't be flying or riding on her for most of the movie. Braum, knowing how to raise a dragon, tells Eragon and Saphira this is what she needs to eat to help her grow faster, and by the end she can be mostly fully grown but probably still not breathing fire. Remember, it was a big deal that Eragon was able to cast a spell that produced fire, so have him do more of that in the final battle. I wouldn't want this to be like Game of Thrones, where it actually takes years for a dragon to be at full maturity and be ready for battle, but I also really hate the magic growth spurt just so so that we can get to the flying scenes. I get it, this movie is supposed to be about the rebirth of the dragon riders, so you want to see the dragon riding. But be patient. If you deliver a good solid movie, then you can get more of that in a sequel. And if you're elevating Galbatorix's screen time here, then you can get your fix on dragon riding anytime you see him and his boy. So in short, what I would do with the Eragon movie: keep Brom alive, remove the princess rescue scene, keep Galbatorix the main villain with the evil wizard just cackling in the background, get more nuance with the reasons Galbatorix fell to the dark side, draw out Saphira's growth over the movie, and add a little extra side adventure for Brom and Murtagh. Maybe it ends on a cliffhanger since the movie we got was already hinting at a sequel anyway. I don't know if you could get all of this done in just under 2 hours or if it would still disappoint people. I'm 100% sure it would disappoint people who enjoyed the books, but like I said, I'm just here to offer ideas on how this movie could have been better. In the meantime, I'll be back here in the future with other videos, so check here for those real soon. Until then, have a great rest of the day.